Well, hello there, my fellow chroniclers. Chris here with the very first post thoughts on a video, or otherwise known as an audio commentary. An ad-libbed audio commentary. This is non-scripted, unlike our series that you love so much. This is completely ad-libbed, completely made up on the spot, and is just something to keep you over, to tide you guys over while we're making new videos. So today we are talking about Fire Emblem on the Famicom, the first Fire Emblem video that we did, and the beginning of the Fire Emblem series as a whole. So Fire Emblem, A Tactful History. I didn't realize originally, I'll say Fire Emblem, A Tactful History, the title of the series. After looking up what tactful actually means on Google, which I never did. Originally, tactful, I just said tactical. That's what I was meaning, like, because it was a tactical RPG. So I was like, ha! Tactful! That seems cool. Now it seems kind of weird, because it has really nothing. It's about showing tact, like being diplomatic, I get, but it's being diplomatic with everything, but Fire Emblem is kind of the opposite of diplomatic when you think about it, because everything is about fighting and killing people. So I kind of chose the opposite, even though it sounds sort of good. Regardless, that is what the series ended up being named. We chose Fire Emblem mostly just because Fire Emblem Fates is around, and it just came out, and I was like, hey, let's do that next, instead of some Western RPG thing that no one will care about, like Fallout. Some people cared about it. It was a little bit different from what is regularly on Loxton's channel when we started it out. I am glad we went over to Fire Emblem. Without the boost from him and everything, we wouldn't have gotten this far. Without him telling everyone about the Fire Emblem series, without having that little video that some of you might not remember, because I think he deleted it, but it was a little comedy bit or whatever that we did on the channel trying to promote Chronicles, and it helped out big time. Got people over to my channel, got them excited for Fire Emblem, and when it came out, it was a really huge hit. Although I learned a lot of people loved Gaiden. A lot of people loved Gaiden a little much, because the meme with that video was, just play Gaiden, bro. Just play Gaiden, bro. I still remember that. I still remember that. I eventually want to do a definitive version of this series where we cover every single game as just one video. So a video for Shadow Dragon, the Blade of Light, a video for Gaiden, a video for Genealogy of the Holy War. Yeah, you get it. Eventually I want to redo that and have, oh god, when we do this, the series as a whole combined, when we'll do a feature-length documentary version of that, will be about maybe 5 hours long. So you think you've seen something with the length of the Fire Emblem documentary. You think that's impressive. The plans I have for the future, though, those are insane. But enough about our series. Let's talk about everything that we missed. Because, yeah, we missed a lot. Going back through just doing simple research that I never did back in the day. I never, I'll go, oh god, some of the things I did are pretty bad with some of the older series. You'll learn when I talk about Sakura Wars specifically. That's not really that much of my original creation. That series that I did on it. Here are some of the many things that I got wrong. First of all, I put too much emphasis on Kaga. Way too much emphasis. He is not the godsend visionary from heaven that I made him to be. He did not direct the very first Fire Emblem. It was Keisuke Terasaki. Keisuke Terasaki. Yeah, he is the director of the original Fire Emblem, not Kaga. Kaga was just the game designer and the writer. He's the guy who made up the story and everything. He thought up the original idea, but he didn't direct the game, unlike later games. Yuka Sugiyoko only composed the game because she was the only composer on Intelligent Systems. It wasn't because she was great. It wasn't because like they just had to have her. She was just around. That's the only reason they chose her. If there was another composer at Intelligent Systems, maybe she would have not been the composer of Fire Emblem, and we would have had a completely different score than what we know Fire Emblem to be. Other things, Daisuke Izuka, not Idzuka. I don't know why. I don't know how I screwed it up that badly. But Daisuke Izuka, he handled the character design, but he wasn't the only person who handled the character design. He was the character designer, but there were also people involved in the world art, the graphics, and all that. The people who made those pretty 8-bit graphics that you see on the screen when you're playing the game, those guys. That's Toru Asawa, Naotoka Onishi, Satoshi Machida, and Toshitaka Muramatsu. These guys that I never mentioned, that are relatively unknown, helped to make the game what it is. And I'm sad that I didn't do that. I had to make a little correction on Dark Dragon and the Sword of Light. It's actually Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Before the series, before Fire Emblem Heroes specifically, a lot of the older Fire Emblem games, a lot of the older ones, didn't really have official name translations. Or well, they did, but everyone wasn't sure. Like, for example, Fire Emblem the Binding Blade is also called Fire Emblem the Sword of Seals and Fire Emblem the Sealing Sword. It's like a bunch of different things. Not everyone could nail it down, but now it's Binding Blade. And so is Shadow Dragon the Blade of Light. So there's that. Fire Emblem, it wasn't the tactical RPG genre that Fire Emblem popularized. It was the simulation RPG genre. Because it's a simulation, because they're simulating fantasy or something. It's an SRPG, a simulation RPG, not a strategy RPG. I don't know how I got that wrong. Again, see, the original name for Fire Emblem was Battle Fantasy Fire Emblem. You wonder why they don't call it. You wonder why they don't call it Battle Fantasy Fire Emblem anymore. Maybe it has to do with I don't know. A Final Fantasy existing. But Fire Emblem in specifically, is called that way because it's meant to emphasize war and dragons. Because emblems, various warring parties have different emblems, and fire for dragons. Dragons breathe fire. Fire emblem. Makes sense. Because there's a lot of dragons in the series. A lot of dragons. A lot of evil dragons. A lot of good dragons. A lot of sort of dragons. Dragons. Fire Emblem. I didn't go too into detail with this, but I said that Fire Emblem was originally a Dojin project. And a Dojin project... It's a fan project. It's niche. It's kind of like fan fiction in a way, like Japanese fan fiction. Except it's original stuff. It wasn't supposed to be an Intelligent Systems project. It wasn't supposed to be huge or anything like that. It was his own personal thing, Kaga's own personal thing. But then they turned it into Fire Emblem as we know it. When the game existed, like the first Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, before now Fire Emblem, where everyone's obsessed with stats. Like, what's this guy's resilience? What's this guy's defense? What's this guy's attack? Hit ratio, avoid, all that jazz. All that crap that we know today. Originally, Kaga didn't want to have that. He avoided emphasizing that. He had it in the game, of course. Like, the stats and everything are in the game. But it isn't emphasized as much as it is today, where it's slapped into your face every 5 minutes whenever a character levels up and all that. In the past, he avoided emphasizing stats and all that, mostly so I can emphasize the pick up and play philosophy in Nintendo, because Mario and Zelda, you can just pick up and play them. You don't really need any prior knowledge. You don't need to have advanced statistical knowledge and all these giant lists that you guys come up with for Fates and Awakening and all that. You didn't need that for the original Shadow Dragon. You just played the game. And that's what he wanted to do. Just have a game that you can play. You don't really need to think about it that much, or well, you think about it much because of connections you have to characters, but the stats weren't the important part. Fire Emblem, from the very beginning, had problems with memory, like cartridge memory. It always hit the limit of whatever console it was on. They had to take out one of the saves on Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon: The Blade of Light. They had to take out one of the save data slots. So, like in Zelda, there are 2 or 3, but in Fire Emblem there are 2 because they had to. Because if they wanted to make it as big, as grandiose as it eventually became, they had to take out that one save slot to save the data. They even had to design a specific chip just to process and display Japanese text. Fire Emblem is one of the very few text-heavy NES games, and they needed this special chip to even be able to use the NES or the Famicom. I keep getting the NES and Famicom mixed. Essentially the same thing, essentially not. Yada yada, you get it. Let's talk about the characters and the scenario for the game. Kaga originally wanted to, or not originally, did want to create a scenario where players could care about the characters in a similar way to a role-playing video game. So like in an RPG, like how you care about your party and you want your party to live and all that stuff. In like strategy games, that really wasn't a thing. Like for example, Famicom Wars, you just had your army. You didn't really care about your army. They were just a bunch of grunts doing their thing. So you didn't really care about them. He wanted to change that. According to him, while role-playing games had strong stories, but singular protagonists, tactical games have multiple characters, but weak story. And Fire Emblem was his solution to all that mess, taking the greatest elements from both genres and combining them into one. And I can't believe I missed that, because goddamn, that is a very good insight. Holy crap. It makes me want to redo the series right now, but I want to move on to Zelda and all that jazz. And also Echoes and Heroes. Marth is the main protagonist of Shadow Dragon, as you know. But he didn't want to emphasize that. Even though Marth is basically the main character. Everyone is the main character. All the characters are the main characters because you care about them more so than your average grunt. He had originally planned to have like multiple scenarios, not like different chapters, but like multiple characters, multiple stories. But yeah, I don't think the Famicom can really handle that, and I think he understood that too, because we did not get that ever. So the initial plan was to create graphic set-piece moments for key story elements and all that. If there's a really important plot point, they wanted to have some cool graphic there. Eventually, they add that in with Shadow Dragon on the DS. There's other things like among the scenes initially planned were Marth kneeling next to Jagan in a pool of blood and 2 characters escaping from an ambush. All these cool, well-designed graphics just couldn't add in because of the memory chip. And that memory chip was the MMC3 memory chip. The adoption of this little chip was influenced by the memory difficulties experienced by a team during the development of Famicom Wars. When it was discovered that the chip only had 1 megabyte of memory. Yes, today we are so blessed by having terabytes and petabytes and all that. Back in the day, or well, 27 years ago, they only had a megabyte. So they were forced to streamline the graphics and visuals and essentially make the game look like shit. Gameplay over graphics was one of the big things. That's why when you look at Shadow Dragon, it doesn't look like the greatest NES game of all time, even though it came out in 1990 when the console was on its deathbed and the Super Famicom was around the corner. But that is really it for the development. I can talk a little bit about after that. Like, there was some early advertising that called it Emblem of Fire instead of Fire Emblem due to the poor graphics that the game had. It just looked like crap, and people couldn't understand the game too, which went in the face of the plug and play philosophy he was trying to go for. It was critically slammed by critics. No one really liked it. but the public loved the game regardless. 2 bonus facts before we move on to the next game. Have you ever seen the epic live-action Fire Emblem commercial that uses an operatic version of the Fire Emblem theme? Well, it was hell to film. The actors overheated due to their costumes, and the light and sound effects made the actor horse skittish. There was a horse in it, and it ended up taking like 20 retakes to do. And also, other thing, as I said, the Battle Fantasy thing in the beginning, the game was originally called Battle Fantasy Fire Emblem. That was because Kaga is a giant fan of Final Fantasy. He loves Final Fantasy, and him and Hironobu Sakaguchi became best friends over an interview. There's an interview done by Shmublations, I think. I don't know how to spell his name in real life, but either in the card or in the description, you can find an interview with the two talking about their giant franchises. It was really interesting. But I'm sure you guys are more interested in learning about Gaiden and all that jazz and what happened with that game, really, since I really did go into that, and I just kind of jumped in after making a comparison to Super Mario Bros. 2 and Legend of Zelda 2. I'm guessing, seeing from the reaction that most of you had when I talked about Gaiden, a lot of people love Gaiden. I didn't realize people loved Gaiden so much, since from what I've seen of it, it's like the black sheep of the series, but everyone loves it so much. That's why it's getting a remake, in my opinion. Even though I don't know yet, because there are no interviews about Gaiden, and I can't talk about Echoes. Or, well, there are interviews about Gaiden, but there are no interviews about Echoes, so I can't really talk about Echoes. Gaiden was the first game directed by Kaga, yes. So if you want another reason to love Gaiden, this is Kaga's directorial debut. He basically set out to set everyone straight from what happened in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. He wanted to correct the critical misrepresentation of the game and fix everything and make everyone love the game for what it was, both fans and critics alike. He also wanted to improve the connection players had with the characters on screen. He wanted them to be more relatable, more personable, and more recognizable than what the Shadow Dragon people were. Everyone that really worked on Shadow Dragon came over for this new thing, mostly because it was the moneymaker, it was the big thing, the big deal, and everyone was still on board. There were no problems yet. That'll happen later, and I'll talk about that in the Super Famicom episode. But moving on, we got everyone from here. When I talked about Gaiden, Gaiden is side story. It's a side story to Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. People like it more than that game, which is ironic, really, that it was supposed to be just supplementary material for the original, but in fact surpassed the original. Other ways he wanted to like improve the story from what it originally was in Shadow Dragon. The reason why Celcia and Alm, or is it Celica and Alm? I think it's Celica. I think I got it right, because we mispronounced her name before, and now it's in English. It's perfectly understandable, unlike before when it was in kanji and translated by fans, and everyone had their own interpretation of how to say it, even though it was never spoken in the English language. The reason why Celica and Alm exists, why there's 2 different paths you're following Celica and Alm, is because Kaga wanted to create a more defined narrative for the series, and that is why it is like that. He also wanted there to be a deeper relationship between characters and their units, as I said before, mostly represented through their growth on the battlefield. They used the same gameplay system as Shadow Dragon, mostly to save time, but to give them a nice, solid foundation to build on for this game, so they didn't have to revamp everything from the ground up like they did with Mystery and Emblem eventually. Gaiden also is the reason why a new memory chip was developed for the Famicom years after the Famicom was essentially dead. The lifetime of consoles is a lot more different and elongated in Japan than here in America. called the MMC4 memory chip. That was the new chip developed partially in response to the memory capacity problems faced during the development of the first game. They had an entirely new memory chip just made for them, which is really interesting because you wouldn't think that Nintendo would want to invest in doing something like that when they have the Super Famicom to worry about at the time. But this goes to show, for the longest time, like Fire Emblem being on dying consoles essentially, whereas now they're on consoles that aren't going to die for a while. Last but not least, I will say that Fire Emblem Gaiden was huge when it came out, man. I did not go into detail as much as possible, but as of now, I think it's the 5th best-selling Fire Emblem game of all time. Or it might become the 6th best. When Echoes comes out, it might become the 6th best, but is one of the best selling Fire Emblem titles of all time, even though it's very, very, very old and it came out on a console 2 years after it had gone down the gutter. It's really interesting that it did that. It was also critically lauded compared to Shadow Dragon for all its new innovations and all that. And it was generally more well received, and it was said to be an amazing game. And I need to play it apparently because people have kept telling me about just play Gaiden, bro, so I might just play it one day. Anyway, that is it for this very first post thought on a game, really, on an episode that we've done. If you'd like to see more of this in the future, let me know, and I will get right on that ASAP. This is not hard to do, this is not going to take long to do, and I enjoy doing it. I like talking about the mistakes I made and some of the interesting stuff that I never got to talk about with this first series on Fire Emblem. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it here. If you'd like to support this channel in the future, please support us on Patreon. You could get a bunch of cool perks and see these episodes early. We're gonna be doing a little thing where we have the second episode up early, or the episode after this one up early on the Patreon. So if you want to get that, then support us for $3 a month. Only with $3 a month, you can get these little commentaries early. And it's not just gonna be me. I'm gonna eventually bring on other guests. I hope to bring on Loxton for the Fire Emblem documentary and have like a 2-hour or so long discussion when we've completed that later this year. And maybe I can bring on like Mangs and Gast and all these other cool Fire Emblem YouTubers later on for some, I don't know, commentary on this. But that is it from me. I hope you continue that thirst for knowledge. Thanks, guys. Sorry for the wait.